Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So, what happens when the strongest alpha general fakes his own death just to escape an unwanted war, only to be hunted down by a dangerously obsessed Enigma King who has loved him for years? From royal politics and hilarious chaos to relentless courtship, family, and heartwarming romance, this is the story of one stubborn alpha, one unhinged Enigma, and a love that refuses to give up. And before diving into the story, if you like this kind of unhinged enigmas and their menace alpha stories and wants to get early access and exclusive themes, don't forget to check out my Patreon page, link in the comment. Now, let's dive into our story. Happy listening, guys.
Chapter 1 Rivals, Politics, and One Disastrous Proposal. In a world where humans and supernatural beings had long learned to coexist, peace appeared effortless. Humans dominated technology, entertainment, and countless industries. The wolf race ruled over their own territories while also standing at the pinnacle of the corporate world. Powerful Alpha and Enigma families controlled international businesses worth trillions, while within the wolf territories they governed ancient kingdoms that had existed for thousands of years. Omegas and betas, gifted with unmatched creativity and healing abilities, flourished in the fashion and medical fields alongside humans. Everything looked peaceful, at least to outsiders. Behind the magnificent castles, lavish royal banquets, and smiling diplomatic gatherings, politics was a battlefield more dangerous than any war. Among the wolf kingdoms, none were more powerful than the eastern kingdom of Silver Heaven and the western kingdom of Blackcrest. Their rivalry stretched back nearly 3 centuries. Long ago, both kingdoms had united to defeat the rogue Shadowfang Empire, saving not only the wolf race but every supernatural species. Yet victory created a new conflict. Between their territories lay the Moonvale border, an ancient land overflowing with pure lunar energy. Whoever governed it would gain stronger bloodlines, richer resources, and unmatched influence over future generations. Neither kingdom surrendered its claim. Neither king wished to kneel. Since then, the rivalry had shifted from swords to signatures. Instead of wars, trade negotiations, political alliances, border disputes, royal conferences, and ministers who smiled while trying to ruin one another's kingdoms. The battlefield simply changed. If there was one person who hated politics more than anyone else, it was General Arthur Reed, younger brother of King Adrian Reed, the ruler of Silver Heaven, commander of the Royal Army, the strongest alpha general alive, the most beloved prince of everyone including his brother, a national hero, and a complete menace. His soldiers adored him. His enemies feared him. His king prayed every meeting that Arthur would remain silent for at least 5 minutes. He never did. Minister Wallace, Arthur spoke lazily during one military discussion, your strategy is truly remarkable. The old minister smiled proudly. Arthur continued, if our enemies ever suffer from insomnia, your battle plan would definitely put them to sleep. The room fell silent. One commander covered his mouth. Another immediately looked away. King Adrian slowly closed his eyes. Arthur. What? Be nice. I am. That's exactly why I'm worried. Arthur innocently blinked. I even complimented him. The minister looked as though he had aged 10 years. Far across the western mountains ruled another legend, King Edward Knightwood, the king of Blackcrest. The strongest enigma recorded in modern history, the very definition of terrifying. Enemy kingdoms often surrendered before his armies even reached their borders. His aura alone was enough to force lesser wolves onto one knee. Yet, there existed exactly one person in the entire world whom Edward could never intimidate. Arthur Reed. Unfortunately for Edward, Arthur treated him exactly the same way he treated everyone else. Like an inconvenience. Whenever the two kingdoms attended diplomatic meetings, Arthur ignored him. If Edward greeted him, Arthur walked away. If Edward complimented him, Arthur rolled his eyes. If Edward smiled, Arthur became suspicious. Why are you smiling? Edward answered honestly every single time. Because I saw you. Arthur would immediately regret asking. Everyone knew. Literally everyone. The palace maids knew. The royal guards knew. The ministers knew. Even the stable horses probably knew. King Edward Knightwood was hopelessly, ridiculously, embarrassingly in love with General Arthur Reed. He never denied it. never hid it, never acted subtle. He once traveled across 3 kingdoms just to hand Arthur a flower. Arthur had looked at the flower, looked at Edward. You crossed 3 kingdoms. Yes? For this? Edward smiled brightly. For you. Arthur stared for several seconds before quietly handing the flower to a passing guard. You keep it. The poor guard nearly cried from receiving a flower personally delivered by an Enigma King. Edward? He simply laughed. You smiled at me for 3 whole seconds today. Arthur nearly threw a rock at him. The royal guards had long accepted one universal truth. Their king had conquered kingdoms, but one grumpy alpha continued conquering him. Several weeks later, the final peace conference between Silverhaven and Blackcrest officially ended. Every treaty had been signed. Trade agreements were finalized. Border disputes were resolved. Military cooperation had finally been established. The delegates from Blackcrest departed for home. Everyone believed the centuries-old rivalry had finally come to an end. How wonderfully optimistic. The following morning, Silverhaven's inner royal court gathered for one final discussion. Unlike the diplomatic conference, this meeting was private. Only Silverhaven's royal family, generals, nobles, and ministers were present. King Adrian sat upon his throne. Arthur occupied his usual seat beside him, looking as though he'd rather be wrestling a mountain bear. Can we finish this quickly? Arthur sighed. I'd rather inspect the soldiers than listen to another 5-hour lecture. One minister coughed. It won't take long, Your Highness. Arthur muttered. That's what you said 3 hours ago. King Adrian ignored him before the situation escalated. So, what remains? An elderly minister slowly stood. Arthur suddenly had a very bad feeling. Your Majesty, although peace has been achieved, there is one final matter that would guarantee everlasting harmony between Silverhaven and Blackcrest. Arthur quietly whispered, No. The minister smiled. A royal marriage. Arthur slowly looked up. Continue. The minister nodded confidently. We believe Prince General Arthur Reed should marry King Edward Knightwood. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Arthur blinked once. King Adrian froze with his teacup halfway to his lips. Several commanders silently prayed. Arthur slowly stood. Everyone instinctively leaned backward. Repeat that. The minister swallowed. We believe. I heard you. Arthur smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. So, you all discussed my marriage, without informing me. Several ministers awkwardly looked elsewhere. Arthur nodded slowly. I see. He turned toward his brother. King Adrian immediately raised both hands. I didn't approve this. I know. Good. Another dangerous silence followed. Arthur sighed dramatically. I refuse. One minister hurriedly interrupted. But Your Highness, King Edward clearly favors you. This would unite the 2 kingdoms forever. Arthur looked at him, as though he'd just suggested adopting a volcano. Exactly. That's the problem. The court looked confused. Arthur folded his arms. That lunatic smiles every time he sees me. He's always sending gifts. He keeps calling me my little moon. He looks at me like I'm the last dessert in the world. A younger minister timidly asked, Isn't that romantic? Arthur looked horrified. No. That's concerning. The entire court struggled not to laugh. Another minister carefully said, But he is arguably the greatest king alive. Arthur nodded. He is. The strongest enigma. He is. The wealthiest monarch. He is. The most handsome king, according to every magazine in the Wolf territories. He probably is. Then what's the issue? Arthur answered without missing a beat. He's insane. King Adrian covered his face. I have absolutely no argument against that. Arthur looked at his brother one final time. I'm not marrying anyone. Especially not that clingy enigma. Without waiting for permission, he turned around, walked straight out of the royal court, and slammed the massive doors behind him. Bang! Silence returned. King Adrian slowly rubbed his temples. Someone please tell me why my younger brother solves every problem by walking away. One old commander sighed. Because he's your younger brother, Your Majesty. Fair enough. Unfortunately, none of them noticed the ambitious ministers exchanging meaningful glances. If persuasion failed, pressure could always be increased. After all, what could possibly go wrong? Chapter 2. The world's most dramatic disappearance. Arthur Reed was done. Done with politics, done with greedy ministers, done with marriage discussions, and most importantly, done with one clingy, ridiculously handsome, hopelessly lovesick Enigma King. He loved his elder brother. He respected him as his king. But Arthur also knew Adrian far too well. King Adrian Reed would never force him into a marriage. Never. However, a king did not fight only foreign enemies. He also fought his own court. The ministers would pressure him. Again. And again. And again. Until one day, even Adrian would have no choice but to give in. Arthur wasn't about to let that happen. That evening, the two brothers quietly played a game of chess in Adrian's private study. Neither spoke for several minutes. Finally, Adrian sighed. The ministers won't stop. Arthur moved a chess piece. I know. They'll return tomorrow. I know. They'll probably bring even more nobles. I know. Is? Arthur casually captured Adrian's queen. So, I'll simply disappear for a few months. Adrian blinked. Excuse me. Arthur smiled proudly. I'll give them an ultimatum. You can't pressure someone into marriage if that someone doesn't exist. Arthur. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Arthur looked offended. It's innovative. It's idiotic. It's strategic. It's illegal. It's brilliant. Adrian sighed so deeply that even the servants outside the room heard it. I already have one kingdom to manage. Please don't become my second problem. Arthur grinned. Too late. Around midnight, Arthur quietly returned to his room carrying a travel backpack. Inside were clothes, money, medicine, several novels, a ridiculously large amount of snacks, and absolutely no guilt. My priorities are perfect. Opening an old wooden box hidden beneath his bed, Arthur carefully removed a weathered scroll. His late grandmother's handwriting covered the faded parchment. Ancient wolf illusion magic? A forgotten art? One almost no one practiced anymore. Arthur couldn't use much, only one spell. But according to him, one was more than enough. Blue light slowly surrounded the room. The illusion expanded. Fire, smoke, burning furniture, a lifeless body. Everything looked horrifyingly real. Arthur admired his own work. I'm kind of a genius. Then climbed out of the palace window. Good luck explaining this, brother. With that, the mischievous Alpha disappeared into the night. Seconds later, a maid opened the bedroom door. Her scream echoed throughout the palace. Fire! Chaos erupted. Royal guards rushed forward. Servants cried. Physicians arrived. Commanders broke down the door. King Adrian sprinted through the corridors faster than anyone had ever seen him move. Arthur! He pushed everyone aside, only to freeze. The room was destroyed. Flames covered every corner. A charred body lay upon the floor. Adrian's face drained of all color. No. He slowly fell to one knee. Arthur! For the first time since becoming king, Adrian looked completely broken. Meanwhile, several hundred kilometers away, inside Blackcrest Palace, King Edward Knightwood was peacefully finishing afternoon paperwork. Across from him stood his ever-loyal second-in-command, Damien Ashcroft. The palace doors suddenly burst open. Edward's personal spy rushed inside before collapsing onto one knee. Your Majesty! Edward didn't even look up. What happened? The spy struggled to speak. Silver Heaven? Edward finally raised his eyes. General Arthur Reed has died in a palace fire. Time stopped. Edward stared at the spy, his expression completely empty. The teacup in his hand slipped. Crash. It shattered across the marble floor. Damien's heart nearly stopped. Your Majesty? No response. Edward simply stood there. His hands trembled, very slightly, but enough for Damien to notice. In all the years he had served him, he had never, not once, seen Edward shaken. The king who stood unmoved before armies looked utterly lost. His voice came out almost as a whisper. No! For the very first time in his life, Edward felt fear, real fear. His chest tightened painfully. His wolf howled in agony. His entire world suddenly felt empty. Without another word, He turned around. Damien immediately followed. Prepare the car. Your Majesty, the diplomatic protocol, I said. His crimson eyes glowed with terrifying authority. Prepare the car. Immediately. Yes, Your Majesty. Less than 5 minutes later. A black luxury vehicle sped towards Silverhaven at a speed that would probably earn several traffic violations if humans had been involved. Edward didn't say a single word during the journey. He simply stared out the window. His fists remained clenched. Damien quietly watched him. He had always known Arthur was important, but not this important. Silverhaven Palace, complete chaos. No one had informed any outside kingdom. No official announcements had been released. Yet, a royal guard suddenly burst inside. Your Majesty. Adrian slowly looked up. What now? King Edward Knightwood is here. What? Several ministers nearly screamed. How does he know? He shouldn't know. Adrian himself stood in stunned silence. We haven't informed anyone. Edward ignored every shocked face. He walked directly toward Arthur's room, stopped at the doorway, looked inside. For one brief moment, his breathing stopped. His heart screamed. His wolf mourned. Then, something felt wrong. Very wrong. His instincts rejected everything before him. His Enigma senses practically roared. This is fake. His crimson eyes suddenly glowed. Ancient Enigma authority exploded throughout the room. Break! Crack! The illusion shattered like broken glass. The flames vanished. The smoke disappeared. The burned body dissolved into blue particles. Within seconds, Arthur's bedroom returned to its original condition. Perfectly clean. Perfectly untouched. The crowd gasped. Several ministers stumbled backward. Adrian stared at the completely intact room. Illusion magic. Edward finally released a shaky breath. Relief flooded through him so suddenly that his knees almost gave out. My little moon is alive for exactly 3 seconds. He looked like the happiest man alive. Then, his expression darkened. He gave me a heart attack. Damien nodded seriously. Respectfully, Your Majesty. I think he gave everyone one. Adrian let out a tired laugh despite everything. I raised that little menace. I should have expected this. Edward slowly looked around the room. There wasn't even a trace of anger toward Arthur, only relief and a surprising amount of admiration. He mastered illusion magic. He almost smiled. Remarkable. Illusion magic was one of the oldest forms of wolf magic. Even among royal bloodlines, very few could perform it. Even fewer could create one convincing enough to deceive an entire palace. My little moon. You're unbelievable, Damien quietly muttered. He's complimenting the man who nearly killed him through stress. Edward ignored him. His smile vanished. He turned toward Adrian. Where is Arthur? Silence. Adrian lowered his head. I don't know. He left without telling anyone. Edward studied Adrian's exhausted face, and the king looked devastated, sleep-deprived, heartbroken. Then Edward understood. Arthur hadn't run away because he wanted to. Something had driven him to such an outrageous stunt. His little moon was reckless, mischievous, and absolutely insufferable. But he would never intentionally make his brother suffer, unless he believed he had no other choice. Edward slowly narrowed his eyes. What happened that forced Arthur to disappear? Chapter 3. The Missing Moon and the Feral King. The room remained silent. Edward Knightwood's patience did not. His crimson eyes settled on King Adrian. What happened? Adrian let out a long, exhausted sigh. There is more. One by one, he explained everything. The ministers, the private court meeting, the marriage proposal, the growing political pressure, Arthur's refusal, and finally, his disappearance. When Adrian finished, Edward simply stood there, expressionless. For exactly 3 seconds, everyone foolishly believed the King of Blackcrest had accepted the explanation calmly. Then, the palace shook. A terrifying enigma aura burst from Edward like a tidal wave. Boom! The chandeliers trembled, windows rattled violently, candles extinguished one after another. Several ministers instantly collapsed onto their knees. Others could barely breathe. Damien quietly stepped back. He's really angry. Edward's voice remained frighteningly calm. Did I ever ask any of you to pressure Arthur into marrying me? Nobody answered. Did I? No, no, Your Majesty, Edward laughed. It wasn't a pleasant laugh. I waited years. I waited for Arthur to choose me. I wanted him to reject me 100 more times if he wished. I wanted him to glare at me, call me an idiot, throw flowers back into my face, and one day say yes, because he wanted to. His eyes darkened. There were countless ways to strengthen peace. Trade, military cooperation, economic alliances. But instead, you cornered the one person I swore I would never force. His voice cracked for the first time. And now, my little moon is gone. The court lowered their heads in shame. Adrian quietly closed his eyes. I failed him. Edward looked at him. No, we both did. For a brief moment, neither king spoke. Both simply stood there, united by the same worry. Edward suddenly turned. Damien. His second-in-command immediately straightened. Mobilize every intelligence network. Search every kingdom, every city, every forest. I don't care how much it costs. I want Arthur found. Damien bowed. Immediately, Your Majesty. Adrian wasn't about to sit idle either. He turned toward his captain of the royal guards. Send our elite units. But, he smiled helplessly, don't expect success. The captain frowned. Why? Adrian chuckled tiredly. Because unless Arthur wants to be found, that menace could hide from the moon itself. Meanwhile, the cause of everyone's collective emotional breakdown was living his absolute best life, human territory, downtown. Arthur unlocked the door to a small yet beautifully furnished condominium, his little sanctuary. No one in the Wolf territories knew it existed. He had purchased it years ago while studying at an elite university in the human world. His military training had remained in Silver Heaven, but his academic education had taken place here. This place belonged only to him. Arthur happily dropped his backpack onto the couch. Finally, no ministers, no politics, no royal meetings, no clingy enigma. He stretched dramatically before collapsing onto his sofa. This is paradise. 5 seconds later, he stared at the empty apartment. It's a little quiet. No. He immediately shook his head. This is peace. Definitely peace. Arthur had more than enough money to spend 6 months doing absolutely nothing. Unfortunately, doing absolutely nothing bored him after 4 days, so he got a part-time job at a neighborhood convenience store. The manager looked at the unbelievably handsome applicant. You're applying here? Arthur smiled politely. I need something to do. Can you use a cash register? Probably. Probably. I'll learn. The manager somehow hired him anyway. Back in Blackcrest, Edward had completely lost his mind. Not publicly, privately. My little moon likes strawberry milk. Buy every brand. Your Majesty, what if he visits a supermarket? Purchase it. The supermarket? Yes. Damien sighed. Understood. 1 week later. My little moon once mentioned liking rainy weather. Edward stared outside. Increase weather monitoring. Damien blinked. Your Majesty, we cannot control the weather. Edward looked genuinely disappointed. Unfortunate. 2 weeks later, Edward entered Arthur's old guest room. Everything remained untouched. His favorite blanket, his forgotten books, even a half-finished puzzle. Edward silently picked up Arthur's scarf. His wolf whimpered. You stubborn alpha, where are you? While Edward slowly became feral. Adrian wasn't much better. Late one evening, Damien arrived carrying another stack of intelligence reports. Adrian accepted them with a tired smile. Nothing again? Damien shook his head. No. Adrian sighed. I knew it. Damien looked at him curiously. You seem oddly calm. Adrian laughed bitterly. I raised Arthur. If he doesn't wish to be found, even destiny needs an appointment. The two men gradually found themselves working together almost every day, sharing meals, comparing intelligence reports, complaining about one impossible alpha. Damien smiled. Your brother truly is unique, Adrian snorted. That's the polite word. Meanwhile, Arthur's biggest concern was deciding what instant noodles to buy. He happily compared discounts, cooked simple meals, walked through parks, read novels, worked evening shifts, and slept like a baby. Occasionally, he caught himself staring at his phone. I wonder. No, I'm not calling that lunatic. He crossed his arms stubbornly. He'll survive. A few seconds later, he probably cried. Arthur sighed. Good. Serves him right. Another pause. Hopefully he's eating properly. Realizing what he'd just thought, Arthur slapped both cheeks. No, we're not feeling guilty. 2 months passed. Edward looked noticeably thinner. Damien quietly worried. Even Adrian commented one afternoon. You look terrible. Edward calmly replied, I haven't slept properly. For 2 months. Then, pure luck intervened. Human territory, a peaceful city park. Edward had been following yet another meaningless lead. As he stepped onto a quiet pathway, he froze. There, on a wooden bench, sat Arthur, wearing casual clothes, eating ice cream, completely relaxed. Edward stopped breathing. Arthur. Arthur slowly turned. The spoon froze halfway to his mouth. Edward. Edward's eyes immediately brightened. My little moon. Arthur looked around, looked back at Edward. Nope. He stood up and ran. Edward blinked once, then sprinted after him. Arthur, go away. You've been missing. I know. I was worried. That's not my problem. It absolutely is. People in the park watched in complete confusion as two impossibly handsome men ran past them, one shouting desperately, the other yelling, Stop following me. Arthur eventually reached his condominium. He hurried inside, locked every door. Safe. Crash. The front door exploded open. Arthur nearly jumped out of his skin. What the? Edward walked inside, hair messy, suit wrinkled, eyes slightly red. He looked nothing like the dignified king everyone feared. Without saying a word, he crossed the room, pulled Arthur into an impossibly tight hug. Arthur froze. Edward? Edward buried his face against Arthur's neck. For the first time in 2 months, he could breathe again. His wool finally settled. He covered Arthur with his scent until the entire apartment smelled like cedarwood and moonlight. Arthur immediately frowned. You're scenting me again. Mm-hmm. Stop. No. I smell like you now. Good. Edward. Mm-hmm. You're annoying. I know. Arthur quietly returned the hug, only for a second, then immediately pushed him away. Don't misunderstand. I just felt bad. Edward smiled softly. I'll pretend I believe that. Arthur rolled his eyes. I'm not returning. Edward blinked. You're not? I want peace. I want 6 months. I want to work. I want to buy discounted bread without attending royal meetings. Edward nodded immediately. All right. Arthur narrowed his eyes. That's it? Yes? You're agreeing? Of course. Arthur became suspicious. Why? Edward smiled innocently. Because if my little moon wishes to stay here, then I'll simply stay with him. Arthur stared at him in horror. Absolutely not. Edward had already taken out his phone. Damien. Yes, Your Majesty? Purchase this apartment building. Arthur's soul left his body. No, Damien sighed from the other end of the call. I was wondering how long it would take. And just like that, Arthur Reed's peaceful vacation officially came to an end. Chapter 4. The Enigma's Little Moon final became his. The morning after Edward found Arthur, King Adrian arrived, so did Damien, so did Silver Heaven's elite guards, and somehow, half of Edward's royal guards. Arthur opened his front door. He stared at the crowd, then slowly looked at Edward. You told them. Edward smiled innocently. I informed Adrian that his brother was alive. Arthur pointed dramatically at his apartment. My secret sanctuary. Adrian looked around. It's nice. Damien nodded. Very cozy. One of the guards whispered, the kitchen is surprisingly clean. Arthur clutched his chest. Why are you all reviewing my house? Edward gently patted Arthur's head. Our house is lovely. Arthur gasped. Our? After several minutes of chaos, Edward finally sat on Arthur's sofa. I'll rest for a moment. The moment his head touched the cushion, He fell asleep, completely exhausted. Arthur blinked. He actually slept. Adrian smiled sadly. He hasn't slept properly for 2 months. Damien quietly added. He kept waking up thinking someone had found you. Arthur's expression softened for just a second. Idiot. Meanwhile, Adrian and Damien casually sat on the same sofa and began discussing kingdom affairs. The elite guards stood around as if Arthur's apartment belonged to the royal family. Arthur looked left, looked right, then completely lost his sanity. Excuse me. This is my house. Why are all of you acting like I'm the guest? Nobody answered. Arthur folded his arms and unknowingly puffed out his cheeks. Edward slowly opened one eye. You're pouting. I'm not. You are. I'm expressing frustration. You look adorable. Arthur huffed. Edward chuckled. Arthur huffed louder. Even Adrian laughed. Damien tried not to, failed miserably. Traitors. Still offended. Arthur marched toward the sleeping Edward. Without warning, he climbed onto the sofa and sat directly on Edward's back. There. I hereby declare you my royal chair. The room froze. The guards nearly fainted. The general is sitting on the king. Edward simply laughed. Comfortable? No. You've gained weight. Arthur gasped. I have not, Edward smiled. Then stay there. Arthur huffed again. You're impossible. I know. Several hours later, after countless discussions, Adrian finally sighed. I've failed. Damien looked confused. Failed? I can't convince my younger brother to come home. Arthur proudly crossed his arms. Exactly. I'll return after 4 more months. Adrian stared at him. Promise? Arthur nodded. I promise. After a long silence, Adrian finally smiled. Very well. Edward immediately stood. I'll stay. Arthur blinked. No. Yes. You have a kingdom. I delegated it. You have responsibilities. So do you. My responsibility is resting. My responsibility is you. Arthur pointed at himself. I can protect myself. I'm literally the strongest alpha general alive. Edward nodded affectionately. You are. Adrian nodded too. You are. Damien nodded as well. You definitely are. Arthur looked pleased. See? Edward smiled. Which is exactly why I'll protect the strongest alpha general alive. Arthur stared. That sentence made absolutely no sense. It makes perfect sense. Everyone laughed. Arthur looked around dramatically. I've been betrayed. Later that afternoon, Edward casually mentioned, I'll head to the company for a meeting tomorrow morning. Arthur looked confused. Company? My business. You own a business? Edward blinked. Yes, a multinational corporation. Arthur slowly turned toward Adrian. You knew? Adrian looked genuinely surprised. You didn't. Damien stared. I thought everyone knew. Arthur looked horrified. I have been living under a rock. Edward smiled proudly. A very adorable rock. Arthur covered his face. The following 4 months, Edward became the most shameless suitor in history. Arthur tried buying discounted bread. Edward bought the entire bakery. Arthur started working at the convenience store. The following week, Edward purchased it. Arthur nearly cried. You bought my workplace? Edward nodded. Now no one can overwork you. Arthur pointed accusingly. You're abusing your wealth. I prefer the term investing in my future spouse. Arthur almost threw a loaf of bread at him. Delivery drivers soon learned to fear Edward. Anyone who smiled at Arthur for longer than necessary received the king's icy stare. One poor courier whispered, I was just delivering milk. Edward narrowed his eyes. Leave the milk. And leave. The gifts never stopped. Fresh flowers, books Arthur secretly wanted, ancient weapons handcrafted by master blacksmiths, soft blankets, rare tea, handwritten letters. On rainy days, Edward personally arrived with hot chocolate. On cold mornings, he cooked breakfast, not once. Did he ask Arthur to marry him? He simply stayed. Patiently, consistently, showing Arthur what kind of man he truly was. Not just a terrifying Enigma King, but someone who remembered Arthur disliked coriander. Someone who quietly covered him with a blanket whenever he fell asleep reading. Someone who celebrated Arthur's smallest victories as though they were his own. Someone who never tried to change Arthur, only stand beside him. Slowly, without realizing it, Arthur stopped waiting for Edward to leave. He started waiting for Edward to arrive. One evening, Edward handed him a cup of coffee. Arthur accepted it naturally, then paused. Edward smiled. What? Arthur looked away. I think I've gotten used to you. Edward's golden smile softened. I was hoping for that. Arthur sighed dramatically. Fine. Edward blinked. Fine? I'll let you court me. Edward looked stunned. Arthur smiled. Properly. For the first time in years, the mighty Enigma King became completely speechless. 4 months later, Arthur returned home willingly. This time, not because politics demanded it, but because his heart wanted to. Edward courted him again, following both modern customs and the ancient traditions of their ancestors. He hunted with his own hands before presenting Arthur with the softest white wolf fur. He gifted him heirloom jewelry, passed down through generations of Blackcrest kings. He carved Arthur's name into the ancient moon tree beside his own. Arthur complained the entire time. This is excessive. Edward smiled. I know. You're hopeless. I know. I love you. Arthur froze. His ears turned bright red. After several long seconds, the Awadi quietly replied, I love you too. Meanwhile, Adrian and Damien had also become inseparable. They spent countless evenings together discussing kingdom affairs, laughing, sharing meals, watching over two hopelessly stubborn royals. Arthur quietly nudged Edward. They're obvious. Edward nodded. They're worse than we were. If they marry, Edward smiled knowingly, Silverheaven's lineage will continue. The Reed bloodline carried an ancient blessing. The dominant alpha of their royal family could bear children with another alpha chosen by the moon goddess herself. Arthur grinned. Good. My brother deserves happiness too. Soon afterward, the wedding of King Edward Knightwood and Prince General Arthur Reed united the East and West at last. The ceremony became headline news across both the human and wolf worlds. The two greatest rivals had become soulmates. Exactly 6 months after their wedding, Arthur shyly handed Edward a small wooden box. Inside rested a tiny silver pair of baby shoes. Edward blinked. Little Moon. Arthur smiled nervously. Congratulations. You're going to be a father, Edward cried. Without shame, without dignity, without caring who watched. Months later, Arthur safely gave birth to a beautiful baby girl with silver hair and brilliant crimson eyes named Lyra Knightwood. As Edward gently held their daughter for the first time, he looked toward Arthur. Still the same stubborn alpha. Still the same menace. Still his beloved little moon. Edward smiled through happy tears. You ran away to escape me. Arthur chuckled weakly. Worst decision I ever made. Edward kissed his forehead. My favorite one. Because it led them exactly where they were always meant to be.